They tell you that spiritual awakening is a grand gain, a colossal acquisition. That one fine morning, you shall wake up and find yourself bathed in a golden beatific light, a state of perpetual bliss where all of life's messy questions have been neatly and finally answered. This is the fairy tale of transcendence, the comfortable mythology that soothes the desperate, striving ego. But I must tell you, this is a dangerous fantasy. Because the genuine article, the authentic experience of waking up, is not an acquisition at all. It is, first and foremost, an act of tremendous and irreversible loss. To wake up is to suffer a profound disillusionment, and I use that word with precise intention. The veil that is said to be lifted is not a celestial shroud woven by the gods. It is a dense, sticky fabric woven by yourself, by your culture, and by the very language you use to describe the world. And when that veil begins to dissolve, not only do you see the world as it is, you simultaneously discover that you cannot, for the life of you, restore the comfortable shadows that provided you with such security. You lose things that you once held as absolutely essential, things that defined your sanity, your identity, and your place in the cosmos, and they are gone forever. Not stolen, mind you. They simply dissolve into a mist the moment you recognize them for what they have always been, elaborate, agreed-upon fictions. The human being, the so-called civilized one, is a creature built upon conventions, social, moral, linguistic, and existential. When you step outside the convention, when you cease to be hypnotized by the symbols, you are left in a peculiar, wide-open space. This space is frightening precisely because it is undefined. It is the loss of the defined self that is the greatest fear, and yet it is the only true liberation. Let us explore, then, this radical divestment. Let us consider the 10 colossal things that the awakened person loses and can never, ever get back. The first, and perhaps most immediately unsettling loss, is the destruction of your capacity to take the social game seriously. The irreversible loss of social earnestness. Before the lifting of the veil, you were a sincere participant in the great, ceaseless drama of social maneuvering. Status, reputation, achievement, hierarchy, these were the pillars of your world. You cared desperately about what people thought of your clothes, your title, your bank account, and your opinions. Now you see the intricate, almost frantic dance for what it is. It is a vast pecking order established not by nature, but by mutual consent. You watch people carefully constructing their images, polishing their personas, using subtle language to imply they are one-up on their neighbor. You observe the maneuvering for invitations, the competitive boasting disguised as humility, the frantic scramble to be recognized or promoted. And you see, with crystal clarity, that it is a game. A completely arbitrary set of rules agreed upon by the players. You might compare it to a particularly solemn version of Monopoly, where the players, utterly convinced that the paper money is real wealth, will cheat, betray, and exhaust themselves to acquire hotels on Park Place. The spell is broken. You suddenly realize that you cannot, with any honest investment of your own soul, play the game in the same way. You may still go through the motions, you must to function in the world, but your heart is no longer in it. You have become the actor who knows the stage is merely plywood and painted canvas, while everyone else in the cast is utterly convinced it is a real mountain. This loss is profoundly lonely. Your old comrades, who are still immersed in the delusion, sense your detachment. They feel that you are not impressed by the things that impress them, that you don't share their anxieties about status and position. They may accuse you of being aloof, arrogant, or having changed. But you haven't become a better person necessarily. You've simply stopped collaborating in the collective hallucination. You've stopped pretending that the emperor is wearing clothes when you can plainly see he is naked. And once you have seen that, you cannot, by any effort of will, conjure the illusion of clothing back onto the monarch. This social detachment naturally leads to the collapse of the mechanism that powered the game in the first place, the desperate, unconscious need for approval. The cessation of the desperate need for approval. Before, the opinions of others were the very ground you stood on. Your sense of self-worth was externally generated, fluctuating wildly based on the latest nod of acceptance or flicker of disdain. You were a slave to the gaze of the crowd, constantly tweaking your performance to secure that vital, transient hit of validation. But once you see the game for what it is, a hollow dance of shifting personas, you recognize the sheer futility of seeking approval within it. What others think of you, you realize, is truly and fundamentally none of your business. Their judgment is simply a reflection of their own story, their own conditioning, and their own emotional needs. It says far more about their internal world than it ever says about yours. The approval you chased was always a shadow. Even when you caught it, it was never enough, and it could be withdrawn at any moment. It was a treadmill. Now you step off. You do not lose all concern for others. That would be sociopathic. You may still value genuine appreciation and respect. But you lose the addiction. You lose the automatic paralyzing assumption that another person's judgment is somehow more real or truer than your own immediate experience of yourself. This is an enormous liberation of energy. All the time and effort once spent image managing is suddenly, gloriously available for actual living. The threat of disapproval, which once controlled your every move, simply loses its binding power. The next set of losses strikes at the very core of your psychological reality, the nature of who you believe yourself to be. This is, arguably, the most profound and terrifying loss of all. You lose your conviction that you are a solid, continuous entity moving through time. The belief in a solid, continuous, fixed self. The conventional view is that I am a rock. The same rock I was yesterday, possessing a core of fixed characteristics, preferences, and qualities that define my identity. This rock is the hero of the story, the owner of the life. But through introspection, through meditation, through simply paying attention, you begin to see the mechanical error in this assumption. You start to notice that what you call yourself is not a rock at all. It is a river. I is merely a collection, a ceaseless flow of thoughts, passing sensations, fragmented memories, cultural programming, and unconscious patterns. It is always changing. The person who woke up this morning is not the person who will fall asleep tonight, nor the person who was 16 years old. You catch yourself being entirely different people in different situations, not because you are being false, but because there is no fixed person to be true to. This recognition is deeply disorienting. If there is no solid me, then who is managing the life? Who is making the decisions? Who is experiencing the experiences? The ego, that final illusion, screams in protest because it is essentially the feeling of a chronic contraction, a clenching that attempts to hold the river still. The mind rebels. It demands a definite subject. But the seeing, once occurred, cannot be retracted. You have seen through the trick. You know that the permanent self is simply a convenient grammatical fiction, a verb masquerading as a noun. It is not a thing, but an ongoing process. And once you know yourself as a process, you can never fully be fooled into defending it as a permanent thing again. The existential anxiety rooted in the desperate need to protect and promote a fictitious entity suddenly becomes absurd. If the self is not a rock, then the story that self tells about itself must also be suspect. The ultimate importance of your own story, the narrative dissolves. We are, all of us, compulsive storytellers. Every human being constructs a grand narrative of their life, where they came from, what their great tragedy was, what their heroic mission is, what it all means. This narrative is the anchor of identity. It is the source of our personal coherence. The story is sacred. It justifies your suffering and glorifies your achievements. When you meet someone new, you tell them a heavily edited, carefully framed version of your story. When you reflect, you rehearse it. The awakened mind sees this story as precisely what it is, a story. A retrospective narrative constructed after the fact to make sense of a continuous, fluid, and often chaotic stream of events. You realize that the facts themselves remain the same, but by shifting the frame, the interpretation, you can create an entirely different narrative. Your greatest triumph might be reframed as a foolish risk. Your deepest wound might be reframed as your most valuable lesson. The story is not the truth. It is merely one possible interpretation out of an infinite number. This realization strips the narrative of its sacred authority. Your identity, once rooted in the coherent plot of your life, loses its foundation. The story becomes like a costume you might choose to wear, functional, perhaps charming, but you are keenly aware that you can take it off at any time. You lose the comfort and security of having a fixed, coherent identity. You become, in the most profound sense, storyless. And while this sounds like a loss of meaning, it is, paradoxically, the gateway to true meaning. When you are no longer forced to live inside the plot, you are free to live in the moment, the only place where life actually occurs. Next, we address the engines that drive the civilized world, the relentless pursuit of goals, and the moral impulse. The capacity to derive meaning from external goals and achievements. The whole structure of Western consciousness is built upon the impulse of becoming, of trying to get somewhere other than where you are. Your life, pre-awakening, was probably an orderly procession of objectives. Get the degree, get the career, get the partner, get the house, get the next big experience. These goals were the sole source of your direction and purpose. But the awakened mind sees through the logic of achievement. You recognize that every single goal is temporary. The satisfaction of achievement is fleeting. It is a momentary peak, immediately followed by the mental search for the next peak. The moment you acquire the thing, the desire for it evaporates, and a new desire takes its place. It is a hamster wheel running perpetually toward a future moment that never arrives. More fundamentally, you realize that all this striving is predicated on a fatal initial assumption that you are not enough as you are. That life is somehow lacking, that something is missing, and that only by acquiring or achieving this external thing can you finally be complete. This assumption, you realize, is the very source of suffering. Once this is seen, you lose your ability to throw yourself into goals with the same wholehearted, desperate conviction. You might still work, you might still create, you might still build, but the quality of the action changes. You are no longer doing it to become someone, or to prove something, or to fill a lack. You are doing it because it is the natural, spontaneous action of the moment, a cosmic play, not a frantic necessity. You are liberated from the tyranny of the future. This loss concerns your moral compass, and it is another deeply isolating one. You lose the ability to hate, blame, or condemn in the old righteous way. The capacity for righteous hatred and moral condemnation. Before, morality was simple. There were good guys and bad guys, villains and victims. When someone acted badly, you felt justified in your anger and condemnation. This feeling of righteousness was a powerful psychological tonic. It made you feel clear, strong, and morally superior. But as you wake up, you begin to see the mechanical necessity behind the actions of others. You realize that everyone is acting out of their conditioning, their wounds, and their fears. The person who hurts you is themselves hurt. Cruelty is a symptom of suffering. Ignorance is not the same as malice. You realize that given the exact same biological and environmental conditioning, the same nervous system, the same childhood, the same culture, you would absolutely do the same things they did. The moral distance between you and the villain collapses. You realize that judgment and condemnation are simply ways of dividing the world, ways of generating conflict and creating more suffering. This does not mean you become passive. You will still act to stop destructive behavior. You will still protect yourself and others, but you do it without the venom of hatred. You do it with a sad, steady understanding that suffering creates suffering and that breaking the cycle requires compassion, not condemnation. You lose the clear, sharp boundaries of black and white morality. You lose the satisfying, energetic comfort of being right. You lose the enemy, and you are left only with the problem of suffering itself. And you cannot, by any means, force the enemy back into existence once you have seen him to be merely a suffering man. The final set of losses define the quality of your interaction with the mundane world. The final set of losses define the quality of your interaction with the mundane world. They are the subtle, pervasive frictions that occur when the awakened consciousness rubs against the sleeping one. The loss of tolerance for mundane superficiality. Before, you could easily engage in the endless, trivial exchange of social chatter. The weather, sports scores, celebrity gossip, trivial complaints. This served a social function. It was a way of filling the silence, maintaining pleasant relations, and avoiding genuine vulnerability. It was the necessary oil for the grinding gears of polite society. But having tasted the depth, having peered into the fundamental nature of things, having seen the ultimate futility of the surface, the shallow waters no longer satisfy. It is not that you have grown morally superior, it is that you have lost your capacity for the inauthentic. You find it excruciatingly difficult to participate in this kind of superficial exchange. The difficulty lies in a loss of patience with the unsaid. In the trivial exchange, the essential reality of existence, the shared mystery of being, the imminent fact of death, the sheer miracle of the present moment, is the elephant in the room that everyone politely pretends not to notice. The chatter is a mechanism for deflection. It is a way of ensuring that no one actually has to be here. The awakened mind cannot help but notice the elephant. It wants to talk about the terrifying and beautiful truth of what is. You crave genuine connection. You want to talk about the nature of existence, the mystery of consciousness, the meaning of suffering, or the staggering beauty of a flower. You want vulnerability, honesty, and truth. You want the substance, not the wrapping paper. And this makes social life terribly awkward. Most people are neither interested in nor comfortable with that kind of depth. They want to keep things light, comfortable, and predictable. To confront the true questions is to confront their own unexamined assumptions, and that is a confrontation few willingly accept over cocktails. You are left with a choice. Either exhaust yourself by pretending to be interested in the light chatter, which feels profoundly false and draining, or risk making people deeply uncomfortable by awkwardly trying to inject real meaning, which usually results in silence or a quick change of subject. You have lost the ability to be satisfied with the surface of things. You have lost the skill of polite evasion. And you cannot force yourself back to the surface, even when it would be socially convenient to do so, because your nervous system now rejects the superficial as a poison. The only thing that satisfies is the deep water, the shared recognition of the profound, even if that recognition is silent. The trivial, which was once filler, is now merely friction. This is a companion loss to the dissolution of the fixed self. Having lost the rock, you lose the need to be predictable and consistent for the sake of appearances, both to yourself and to the world. The attachment to consistency. The ego demands consistency above all else. It must have a unified narrative. It insists, I am a rational person, therefore I must reject this feeling. I am a liberal, therefore I cannot agree with that conservative point. I am a disciplined person, therefore I must never indulge. The maintenance of this consistent image becomes a form of psychological bondage. It forces you to freeze frame a continuous process and then dedicate all your energy to protecting that outdated snapshot. You become the living ghost of yesterday's decision. But the awakened mind, having accepted its nature as a fluid process, sees the sheer absurdity of this demand. You realize it is perfectly natural to contradict yourself, to change your mind 5 times before breakfast, to be completely different today than you were yesterday. You realize that only a dead thing is completely consistent. Life, by its very nature, is a chaotic, flowing, self-correcting contradiction. You become comfortable with paradox, with the coincidence of opposites, with the fact that you can be terrified and utterly at ease at the same time, or that a terrible event can be, simultaneously, the best thing that ever happened to you. This means you lose the security that comes from having a fixed, defined position to stand on. You become intellectually and emotionally naked, but you gain a dynamic, fluid responsiveness to reality. You are no longer burdened by the need to defend a persona that no longer exists. You stop pretending that yesterday's thoughts are more important than today's reality. You are free to be an authentic response to the immediate, always changing moment. The final and most deeply rooted illusion that must be lost is the one that promises comfort, that offers a release from the continuous strain of existence. The hope for a final arrival or solution. Before awakening, you carried a fundamental hope, a deep, often unspoken conviction that there was a point of arrival. A moment after sufficient striving, achievement, prayer, or therapy, where everything would finally be okay, where the struggle would cease, where the confusion would resolve, and where you would, at last, feel complete. This hope, whether it was centered on wealth, enlightenment, or the perfect relationship, was the ultimate justification for the present struggle. It was the myth of the ultimate reward. But the awakened mind realizes that there is no arrival. Life is not a destination, it is a process. It is a dynamic system, and a dynamic system, by definition, has no final goal. The moment you achieve an answer, a new, deeper question arises. The moment you secure a piece of ground, new erosion begins. Every moment of peace is immediately followed by a new disturbance, and the attempt to hold on to the peace is the disturbance itself. The idea that there is an ultimate, static, finished state of perfection is a dangerous myth. It is the very myth that keeps you from living perfectly now. You are always sacrificing the living present for a dead, imagined future. The loss of this hope is devastating. It feels like the ultimate betrayal. If there is no final salvation, no eternal bliss to be won, then what exactly is the point of any of it? But here is the final exquisite paradox. When you lose the hope for an arrival, you gain the ability to be perfectly here. You stop running toward a future that doesn't exist, and you start living fully in the eternal now, which is the only place where reality ever resides. The destination, you realize, was an illusion used to avoid the journey. By abandoning the goal of completion, you allow yourself to be complete in this very moment. You stop trying to get somewhere, and you start celebrating the simple, chaotic, miraculous fact that you are. You become content with the process itself, understanding that the point of the dance is not to end up in a particular spot on the floor, but simply to dance. We have discussed the great divestment, the 10 colossal illusions that must be shed and which, once shed, cannot be picked up again, not even for comfort. You lose the social mask, the moral righteousness, the desperate craving for approval, the fixed identity, the comforting story, the final goal, and the ultimate hope for arrival. What then is left? The answer is nothing. But this nothing is not mere emptiness or nihilism. It is the vast, open, terrible, and utterly magnificent freedom of no longer being imprisoned by the dream. It is the universe looking out of your own eyes. You are free not because you have transcended reality, but because you have fully, finally accepted reality as it is. You are free to simply be without the incessant, exhausting internal demand to become something else. This freedom is not the blissful security promised by the spiritual marketplace. It is more like standing alone on a boundless open plain. There is nothing to hold on to, nothing to hide behind, and nothing left to define you. It is terrifying, this boundless space. Yet, this terror is the necessary price for the ultimate discovery. The things you lost, your story, your image, your achievements, your beliefs, were merely the costumes you wore, the masks you put on, the games you played. They were the friction in the system. And what you discover when you lose everything you thought you were is that what you really are was never those things anyway. What you are is vast, indefinable, and beyond all categories. It is the very intelligence that runs the cosmos, the consciousness that underlies the entire spectacle. The challenge of communication, once this irreversible loss has occurred, becomes immense. How do you convey the nature of a thing that has no fixed form to people whose every tool for understanding is designed only to measure fixed forms? You find yourself speaking in parables, in paradoxes, in metaphors of rivers and dances, because the truth simply cannot be caught in the net of conventional language. The language itself is part of the great illusion, a convention that insists that nouns are real things and that the space between things is emptiness. But the awakened mind knows that the space is not empty. It is the ultimate reality, the ground from which all things spring, and the things themselves are merely the patterns within the space. You lose your belief in the primacy of the object, and you recognize the ultimate reality of the field, the context, the environment, the whole universe. This shift, this profound realignment of your vision, means that you lose the comforting, habitual sense of alienation. The feeling that I, a stranger, stand afraid in a world I never made, dissolves. The world outside your skin, once perceived as a hostile or indifferent machine, is recognized as the same fabric as the world inside your skin. You are not in the universe. You are the universe, momentarily localized in this particular pattern called you. This is the meaning of the loss of the fixed self. The self was the wall, the fence that maintained the delusion of separation. When the wall falls, the contained self leaks out, and the outside world leaks in. The distinction between self and other becomes a convenience, a matter of social etiquette, not an existential truth. And this leads to the next layer of loss, which is the loss of the anxiety of consequence in the conventional sense. You do not become reckless, but you lose the paralyzing fear of failure that was rooted in the defense of the fixed ego. If there is no permanent, solid me to be ruined, then what is there to fear? The financial ruin, the social embarrassment, the public failure, these are all events happening to a character in a story that you are no longer taking seriously. They are simply shifts in the pattern, movements in the dance. The loss of the ego's fixed position means you gain the terrifying freedom of improvisation. Life is no longer a script you must follow to a successful conclusion. It is an unscripted play in which you are the primary actor, the audience, and the stage manager all at once. The only rule is responsiveness. The fear of making a wrong move vanishes because you realize that in the cosmic game there are no wrong moves, only new information that changes the next step. This is the great exchange, security for spontaneity. The loss of the solid rock also removes the burden of possessiveness in its most fundamental form. You lose the absolute conviction of ownership. You realize that you do not have your thoughts. They simply occur. You do not own your body. It is a temporary structure maintained by the constant flow of energy from the sun and the earth, which will inevitably be returned to them. You do not possess your loved ones. They are free beings who are merely patterns of the same cosmic flow, temporarily intertwining with your pattern. This means you lose the terrible agony of attachment. When loss comes, and loss always comes, it is still recognized as suffering, but it is not the annihilation of your being. You lose the feverish clinging, the psychological refusal to let things be as they are. You cease to be the puppet master trying to force the universe to conform to your desires. You allow the river to flow, and in this allowance you gain an extraordinary paradoxical power. The power that comes from alignment with the flow of the universe rather than resistance to it. The power of effortless action, which the Taoists call Wu Wei. You have lost the fight, and in that loss, you have won everything. The ultimate conclusion of this irreversible loss is the recognition that you are not a spectator of life. You are the happening itself. You are not something separate from the wind, the trees, the stars, or the person sitting across from you. You are the universe having a momentary experience of being a human being named you. And this realization, this final, profound loss of separation, is the ultimate freedom. It is the only thing that cannot be unlearned. It is the self that remains when the ego finally dissolves. It is the eternal, undying process of life simply being itself. The irreversible loss of the need to be right. This is a subtle yet profound liberation. Before the awakening, the mind was often engaged in a constant, low-grade warfare with reality, always insisting on how things ought to be, rather than accepting how they are. This insistence was the ego's final, desperate defense mechanism. If I can prove that my interpretation of the world is correct, then I am safe, I am solid, I am the ultimate arbiter of truth. You lose this neurotic need for correctness. You realize that being right is merely a mental trophy, a symbolic victory over an external reality that remains completely unchanged by your opinion of it. The wind continues to blow, the rivers continue to flow, regardless of whether your political party, your spiritual teacher, or your personal philosophy is definitively correct. The ego, you see, confuses the map with the territory. It treats its own thoughts and opinions, which are just fleeting, conventional symbols, as the actual structure of the universe. To be right is to ensure the map is perfectly aligned with the territory, even if the territory is constantly changing. But the enlightened person discards the map and chooses to walk on the ground itself. This surrender to the flow is simultaneously a loss of intellectual arrogance and a gain of profound wisdom. You stop correcting the universe. You stop arguing with the moment. You recognize that the universe, being an infinitely complex self-correcting system, is always, in some ultimate incomprehensible sense, right in what it is doing. This does not imply passivity or intellectual dullness. On the contrary, when you stop wasting energy defending an opinion, all that power is released into a vibrant, inquisitive curiosity. You become genuinely interested in the perspectives of others, not to defeat them, but to genuinely understand the structure of their particular world map. You realize that truth is not a single fixed point to be guarded, but a boundless, shimmering field experienced differently from every single vantage point. The loss of the need to be right is the loss of the intellectual sword. You lay down your weapons and become a true student of existence, constantly surprised by what you encounter, rather than constantly trying to categorize and conquer it. And this liberation from mental warfare extends to the most fundamental anxiety of all, the fear of insecurity, the great loss of the promise of security. The civilized mind is obsessed with insurance. We insure our health, our houses, our careers, our retirements, and even our spiritual future. We live in a state of perpetual tension, trying to build a fortress against the inevitability of change, pain, and death. We seek security in permanence, yet permanence itself is the single greatest illusion of the cosmos. Everything is temporary, everything is on loan. The awakened mind accepts this. It loses the desperate neurotic impulse to find a safe, fixed ground to stand on, precisely because it sees that the only safe place is the knowledge that there is no safe place. The ground is always moving. The pursuit of security, you see, is itself the source of the greatest insecurity. The more tightly you cling to something, be it wealth, reputation, or even a moment of peace, the more terrifying is the prospect of losing it. You become a prisoner of your possessions, a guard in your own psychological fortress. To lose the promise of security is to gain absolute confidence in the insecurity of life. It is to realize that you are like a sailor on an open sea who, rather than trying to solidify the water, learns to navigate by trusting the flow, the currents, and the wind. You realize that your true security lies not in what you hold, but in your ability to respond to whatever happens next. This is the meaning of floating. A person floats not by holding their breath and clenching their muscles, that causes them to sink, but by completely relaxing and allowing the water to support them. You lose the desire to clench, and you discover that the universe, the great system of nature, is entirely capable of carrying you. This is the profound, beautiful loss of the fear of falling. Furthermore, the awakening entails the irreversible loss of the concept of waste. The modern, goal-driven mind is obsessed with efficiency and utility. Every moment must be productive. Every action must serve a quantifiable purpose. If an hour of your time does not lead to a visible achievement or a measurable gain, it is considered wasted. This concept of waste creates immense guilt and anxiety, preventing the mind from ever being truly at rest. But once you see life as a dance rather than a journey, the idea of waste becomes meaningless. When a musician plays, is the sound of one note wasted if it doesn't lead directly to the final chord? When a river flows, is a single ripple wasted if it doesn't transport a ship? The essence of the universe is play and process, not mere utility. The existence of a moment is its own sufficient purpose. A flower is not wasting time by simply existing in its full, complex beauty. You lose the inner accountant who is constantly tallying the profits and losses of your existence. You realize that your mind can wander, your body can rest, and your time can be spent in utterly non-productive joy, and this is not a waste. It is, in fact, the most deeply meaningful action possible because it aligns you with the spontaneous, non-utilitarian intelligence of nature. This loss frees you to savor existence rather than constantly trying to spend it. And finally, you must sustain the loss of the spiritual commodity, the irreversible loss of the spiritual marketplace. Before, the spiritual path was often treated as another form of the achievement game. Enlightenment was the highest goal, the ultimate commodity to be purchased through discipline, meditation hours, silent retreats, and adherence to rigid doctrine. You were accumulating merit, acquiring wisdom, and investing in a superior future state of consciousness. But the awakened mind sees that true wisdom cannot be bought, sold, or accumulated. It is not a product. It is not a state you arrive at. It is the state you already are. The moment you try to get enlightenment, you push it away because the you who is trying to get it is the very illusion you need to surrender. You lose the language of spiritual competition, the boasting about how long you meditated, how pure your diet is, or how much you have mastered the self. You realize that such talk is merely the social game dressed up in spiritual clothing. It is the ego cunningly attempting to be one up on others, even in the realm of non-ego. This loss means you can no longer approach the profound reality of your being with the anxious calculation of a consumer. You approach it with the simple, open humility of a beggar who realizes the entire treasury has been his all along. The ultimate wisdom is not a secret to be unlocked, but a fundamental reality to be seen. You lose the complicated map and stumble onto the treasure you were seeking. And having lost the spiritual commodity, you gain the freedom to be utterly ordinary. To realize that the ultimate cosmic truth is not found in some exotic, distant experience, but in the simple, present, miraculous facts of everyday life. Washing the dishes, cutting the wood, laughing with friends, watching the clouds. The most ordinary things become the most extraordinary. This irreversible loss of the extraordinary quest, then, is the final freedom. You are liberated into the sheer, unspeakable wonder of the here and now. You are liberated into the spontaneous dance of life, completely stripped of your false armor, your false security, and your false purpose.